I warned her more times than I can count. Quiet warnings, gentle ones, even desperate ones. She smiled, nodded, and walked straight past every single one. The night she called me crying, everything she owned was already gone, and by then there was nothing left I could save. My daughter always believed consequences were something that happened to other people, not her. She was smart, confident, and convinced that love would protect her from reality. I was her mother, the one who worried too much, questioned too much, and, in her words, didn't understand how the world worked anymore. I tried to explain. I tried to slow her down. I tried to make her see the cracks forming beneath her feet. But warnings sound like noise when you think you're untouchable. Where are you watching from today? Stay with me until the end. I would love to hear from you in the comments. Because this story isn't just about what my daughter lost. It's about what happens when love is mistaken for protection and when ignoring the truth costs more than anyone expects. The first weeks of her new independence began with excitement, almost a thrill. She had packed her things, signed the lease, and declared that she was ready to handle life on her own. I remember standing at the doorway, smiling through the worry knotting my stomach. "You'll be fine," I said, but my voice carried more hope than certainty. At first, it was smooth sailing. Bills arrived as expected, the fridge was stocked, and she moved through her apartment like it belonged to someone in control. She cooked, cleaned, and even managed to avoid the tiny disasters I had warned her about. For a while, it seemed she had mastered independence effortlessly. Then came the first wake-up call. The utility bill arrived higher than expected. She had underestimated the cost of electricity in her old apartment. She called me late one night, voice tight with tension. "Mom, I think I need help. I didn't realize how much this would cost." I stayed calm, guiding her to check her usage, helping her set a temporary budget, but letting her make the final choices herself. She grumbled at first, frustration brimming, but I could hear the gears turning in her mind. By midweek, she faced the first real consequence of her choices. The groceries she had stocked were nearly gone, and she had overextended on takeout. Her excitement dimmed, replaced by something heavier, accountability. She asked for advice, not rescue. She weighed options, debated decisions, and took steps to stretch her funds. That was the first sign of growth, the difference between someone living carefree and someone beginning to live responsibly. Not every day was smooth. She discovered late fees, missed a small payment on her phone, and realized the laundry machine was more temperamental than she remembered. Each challenge carried a sting of reality. When she called, frustrated tears in her voice, I didn't scold. Instead, I offered perspective. "Mistakes don't mean failure," I said softly. "They mean learning. The sooner you face them, the sooner you gain control." The evenings were when reflection hit hardest. She would sit at the kitchen table, notebook in front of her, writing down every expense, every small victory and setback. I could hear her muttering calculations aloud, weighing choices. Independence, she began to realize, was less about freedom from rules and more about mastery over consequences. And in those quiet moments, the transformation began. Not dramatic, not loud, but steady, building a foundation for the woman she was becoming. By the end of those first few weeks, I could see subtle changes. The laughter was still there, but it was mixed with focus. The pride in her own problem-solving replaced the previous reliance on others. And in our late-night calls, I noticed her tone had shifted. Confident, self-aware, and cautiously optimistic. She was learning not just to survive, but to navigate life with intention. The first month had ended with small victories, but the second month arrived with challenges she hadn't anticipated. The thrill of independence began to fade, replaced by the relentless pressure of responsibility. The excitement that had once lit her eyes was now tempered with exhaustion, stress, and a creeping realization that freedom came with a price. Her part-time job had started cutting hours due to a slow season, leaving her with less income than she had counted on to cover groceries, bills, and rent. Even minor mishaps, like spilling milk or forgetting a phone payment, felt monumental when there was no safety net. One evening, I received a call that made my stomach tighten. "Mom, I don't know what to do. Everything is falling apart," she whispered, voice trembling. I listened patiently, letting her unload everything at once. She rattled off the problems in a rush: missed utility payments, a forgotten grocery trip, a late fee on her phone bill, and a creeping anxiety she hadn't felt before. I could hear the fear beneath the words, the realization that her independence was both thrilling and terrifying. "Okay," I said softly, keeping my voice steady. "Let's look at this together. Tell me what's most urgent." She took a shaky breath, listing her priorities, and I guided her through each step: how to negotiate a payment plan with a utility company, how to stretch the remaining groceries into meals for the week, how to call her landlord about rent without panicking. I didn't take over. I asked questions that made her think, nudged her gently toward better choices, and encouraged her to own each decision. At one point, she broke down, tears streaming as she sank into the couch. "I thought independence would be fun. I thought I'd feel free. Instead, I feel like I'm drowning." "Drowning isn't failure," I said softly, my own heart aching. "It's reality, and it's what teaches you how to swim." We spent hours strategizing that night. By the time she hung up, she had a plan, and more importantly, a renewed determination. She realized that independence wasn't about avoiding mistakes. It was about facing them, learning from them, and moving forward. The following weeks were peppered with small crises. Her phone bill was overdue again, forcing her to choose between essentials. A minor grocery miscalculation left her short on meals. Even a broken faucet demanded urgent attention. Each problem was a test, and each required her to pause, think, and act. I watched from afar, proud yet careful not to intrude. The lessons weren't in solving problems for her. They were in watching her learn to manage her life, mistakes and all. Each small triumph, calling the utility company, preparing a week of meals from what she had, budgeting for the next paycheck, built her confidence incrementally. By mid-month, she had begun to pause before impulsive decisions. She started weighing outcomes. Should she buy the coffee or save for rent? Could she splurge on an outfit, or would it push her budget into crisis? The thrill of rebellion faded, replaced by the weight of responsibility and the quiet satisfaction of solving problems herself. There were moments of panic and frustration, certainly. A late-night call from her sounded strained. "Mom, the washer just broke. How am I supposed to—" She stopped mid-sentence, realizing she had to finish her thought aloud. I'd guided her gently. "Let's figure out the most urgent steps. What can be done today?" By addressing the problem one step at a time, she learned that no disaster was insurmountable if approached with patience and clarity. Independence, she was beginning to understand, was not the absence of hardship. It was the ability to navigate it. By the end of the second month, the transformation was subtle but unmistakable. The daughter who had once brushed off every warning had begun to develop judgment rooted in responsibility. She wasn't perfect, and the crises were far from over, but the foundation had been laid. She could face challenges without collapsing, and she had started to trust herself in ways she never had before. Her calls to me began to change in tone: less panic, more strategy; less complaint, more reflection. Each conversation was a reminder that growth is measured not by avoiding hardship, but by learning to stand tall despite it. The lessons of month 2 weren't flashy. There were no dramatic victories, no overnight changes. Instead, they were quiet, cumulative, and profound. She was learning that the cost of ignoring reality was high, but facing it head-on could be empowering. And as she hung up the phone that final night of the month, I noticed a subtle yet unmistakable shift in her voice: steady, thoughtful, and beginning to own her life. She was no longer just surviving, she was starting to thrive. By the third month, the initial thrill of independence had faded completely. The excitement that once made her apartment feel like a playground was now replaced by the daily grind of responsibilities she couldn't escape. Bills, errands, cooking, minor repairs, every single task demanded attention, energy, and careful judgment. There were no shortcuts, no quick fixes, and no one to rescue her from the consequences of mistakes. One morning, her call came with a quiet tension I hadn't heard before. "Mom, I think I messed up," she said. "I forgot to pay the car insurance, and now there's a late fee." I didn't scold or panic. Instead, I guided her calmly, asking questions that made her think. "How much is the late fee? Can you call the company and explain? What steps can you take to prevent this next month?" She listened, took notes, and acted. It wasn't the mistake that mattered, it was how she handled it. She was learning that errors didn't define her, how she responded to them did. This month also brought her first real test of budgeting. Rent, utilities, groceries, transportation, everything added up faster than she had anticipated. For the first time, she had to make hard choices, skip a coffee outing, cook at home instead of ordering takeout, delay a small purchase to ensure bills were covered. Each choice carried a sting, a reminder that freedom had a cost, but with every decision, she learned patience, foresight, and the value of planning. I observed from a distance, careful not to overstep. My guidance was subtle, questions to make her think, nudges to explore alternatives, but the responsibility belonged entirely to her. Slowly, she internalized the principle that competence breeds confidence. She began to realize that solving problems herself brought a quiet pride that no one could give her. Moments of doubt still emerged. One night, exhausted from juggling work, errands, and house responsibilities, she admitted, "Mom, I don't know if I can keep up." "You can," I said firmly, "because you've already proven that you can handle more than you think. These obstacles aren't stopping you, they're teaching you." As the days passed, her perspective shifted subtly but powerfully. Independence wasn't about doing whatever she pleased. It was about understanding consequences, learning from mistakes, and taking control responsibly. Every setback became a lesson, every challenge an opportunity to grow. She began noticing patterns she had ignored before. Impulsive spending led to panic. Careful planning led to calm. She started asking herself, "Do I really need this now, or can I save for something more important?" Decisions that once felt trivial now carried meaning. She was developing foresight, learning to measure choices before acting. Her confidence, previously rooted in defiance or rebellion, now came from competence. Pride grew from problem solving, not ignoring advice. Even small achievements, a bill paid on time, a minor repair handled without stress, brought satisfaction. The woman who had once shrugged off all warnings was now standing on her own, building resilience month by month. By mid-month, a bigger test arrived, her first unplanned medical expense. A sudden appointment with a specialist meant a payment she hadn't budgeted for. Panic flickered in her voice during our call. "Mom, I don't have enough saved for this." I guided her calmly. "Let's break this down. Can you split the payment? Is there a flexible plan? What's the minimum you can pay now?" She researched, made calls, and negotiated a solution entirely on her own. When she hung up, there was a quiet pride in her voice. "I figured it out." That moment was a turning point. The lesson wasn't the payment itself, it was the empowerment of taking ownership. She realized she could face unexpected obstacles without panicking, and that her own decisions mattered more than anyone else's warnings. The final week of the third month brought a quiet reflection. She sat at the kitchen table, notebook open, tallying the month's victories and lessons learned. She paused before spending, considered outcomes, and planned for the month ahead. The thrill of independence had been replaced by something more enduring: responsibility, foresight, and a growing trust in herself. By the end of the month, the transformation was undeniable. The daughter who had once ignored every caution, who believed life would always provide a safety net, was beginning to truly stand on her own. She wasn't perfect, far from it, but she was learning, growing, and becoming resilient in a way that no lecture or warning could have taught her. Her calls to me now carried a different tone, measured, reflective, confident. The excitement of rebellion was gone, replaced by the satisfaction of mastery. She was no longer just surviving, she was learning what it meant to live independently, with foresight, responsibility, and a growing sense of control over her own life. And as she hung up that last call of the month, there was a subtle, unmistakable shift in her demeanor. The journey was far from over, but she had started to take full ownership of her life. For the first time, I could hear in her voice what I had been hoping for all along: competence, courage, and the quiet strength that comes from facing life head-on. By the 4th month, the lessons of independence had begun to take root, but life, as it often does, had other plans. The small victories of budgeting, planning, and problem-solving were suddenly overshadowed by setbacks she hadn't anticipated. A minor car accident one week drained part of her savings. A surprise medical bill the next forced her to reconsider her budget. Then came the blow. Her hours at work were cut, leaving her with less money than she had counted on to cover even the essentials. For someone who had believed freedom meant doing whatever she pleased, the reality was sobering. She was learning, slowly but surely, that independence wasn't glamorous. It was demanding, relentless, and at times unforgiving. One evening, I received a call from her. Her voice trembled, uncharacteristic of the confidence she had been steadily building. "Mom, I don't know what to do. Everything is falling apart." I stayed calm, listening carefully without judgment. She rushed through a list of problems: missed payments, a broken washing machine, food running low, and the anxiety that came with facing these challenges alone. The freedom she had sought with such excitement was now suffocating, and I could hear the weight of reality pressing down on her. Step by step, I guided her. I didn't provide solutions outright, but I asked the questions that made her think. Which bills are most urgent? Can any payments be rearranged? Who can help if needed? What's the first small step she could take to regain control? She took the lead. She made calls, rearranged her budget, and found temporary solutions. I observed quietly, offering support but never taking over. The most important lesson wasn't about solving these problems, it was about building resilience. She was learning to face consequences, to navigate life without immediate rescue, and to trust her own capacity to make decisions. At one point, she broke down in tears. "I thought independence would be fun. I thought I'd feel free. Instead, I feel like I'm drowning." I held the phone close, my voice steady. Drowning isn't failure, it's reality, and reality teaches you how to swim. Slowly, she began to shift. The impulsive spending that had once seemed inconsequential now required thought. The tasks she had brushed off before were no longer optional. Mistakes that felt catastrophic at first became stepping stones to wisdom. Every small crisis was teaching her a new skill, a new way to measure consequences before acting. Through the week, I noticed subtle but meaningful changes. She paused before purchases, considered long-term impact, and began to weigh priorities with an awareness she hadn't had at the start. She still experienced frustration, moments of despair, but now they came with reflection, not panic. She was learning that life's challenges were not punishments, but opportunities to grow. Even amidst setbacks, there were triumphs. Successfully negotiating a lower bill, resolving a problem at work, handling an unexpected task without panic. These victories were quiet, internal, but they built an unshakable foundation. She was no longer just surviving, she was becoming competent, resilient, and capable of handling what life threw her way. By the end of the 4th month, the change was undeniable. She was still imperfect, still learning, but the daughter who ignored every warning, who thought independence would be carefree, was now someone who paused, considered consequences, and acted thoughtfully. The bond between us had grown deeper, not only as mother and daughter, but as mentor and learner, guide and adventurer. Through these weeks, a vital truth became clear. Independence isn't just about doing things on your own. It's about trusting yourself, navigating uncertainty, and discovering that strength grows from confronting challenges, not avoiding them. She was learning that every decision mattered, that every action carried weight, and that accountability wasn't a punishment, it was a path to empowerment. As she hung up the phone that final night of the month, her voice carried a subtle confidence, quiet but undeniable. The road ahead would have more obstacles, more lessons, and more moments of doubt, but she was learning to face them all with resilience, skill, and growing self-reliance. The 4th month ended not with a dramatic turnaround, but with a steady, almost imperceptible shift in her character. She wasn't perfect, but she was stronger. She wasn't fearless, but she was capable. And she wasn't just surviving, she was learning to live with intention, building the foundation she would need for every challenge still to come. Month 5 arrived with challenges she hadn't anticipated. Life, it seemed, refused to give her a moment of comfort. A major expense, a car repair she couldn't avoid, threatened to undo the progress she had made. Panic flickered in her eyes, but this time it was tempered with determination instead of despair. She called me that evening, voice steady but strained. "Mom, I need advice. I have enough to cover part of it, but I don't know how to make it work." We sat together, papers spread across the kitchen table, calculators humming, and phones open for research. I offered guidance, but I didn't take over. She mapped out payment plans, compared repair shops, and even negotiated a small discount herself. Every decision, every calculation, every phone call came from her. I watched as competence replaced panic and pride replaced fear. By the time the repair was completed, she had solved the problem herself. Not perfectly, there were still lessons to be learned, but with enough skill to carry forward. That evening, she reflected quietly on her week, a newfound calm in her posture, a subtle pride in her voice. She had faced a real obstacle and navigated it without depending entirely on someone else. Confidence now came from competence, not defiance. Pride stemmed from problem solving, not rebellion. Month 5 wasn't just about surviving another unexpected bill. It was about learning that independence meant mastering responsibility, not escaping it. She began to see patterns she had ignored before. Impulsive choices led to crises. Careful planning led to stability. Decisions carried weight, and every action had consequences. The lessons from previous months, the budgeting, the setbacks, the sleepless nights worrying about bills had finally settled into her consciousness. Each day, she became more self-reliant. She discovered that the emotional highs of independence, freedom, autonomy, control, were fleeting if they weren't paired with careful decision-making. Real empowerment came not from doing what she wanted, but from understanding what was required to sustain it. There were still mistakes. She misjudged grocery costs one week, forgot a minor payment another, but now she faced each challenge with a plan. She problem-solved, reflected, and adjusted without panicking. She learned that mistakes weren't failures, they were opportunities to adapt. One evening, as she recounted her day over the phone, I noticed a subtle change in her voice. "I figured out how to cover the car," she said, quiet and measured. "It wasn't easy, but I made it work." I smiled softly. "You didn't just fix the car, you practiced independence. That's what matters." She paused, then said, I think I understand now. I can't just expect life to hand me solutions. I have to find them myself. Exactly. That was the lesson she had resisted at first, the one she had been blind to during her early excitement for freedom. Independence wasn't a gift, it was a responsibility, and responsibility required awareness, patience, and courage. By the end of month 5, she had learned a crucial truth. Independence was not freedom from responsibility, it was mastery over it. Every challenge she faced, every unexpected setback, every long night spent recalculating budgets and negotiating solutions had been a teacher. Her confidence no longer depended on the world agreeing with her. It came from competence, from knowing she could face whatever life delivered and handle it thoughtfully. She was no longer just surviving the lessons of adulthood, she was learning to thrive within them. That night, as she lay in bed, she whispered over the phone, "Thanks, Mom. I feel like I can handle things now." I heard the pride in her voice, tempered with humility. She had learned to navigate life without immediate rescue. She had experienced fear, frustration, and failure, and she had survived. That combination, more than any advice or warning I could offer, would guide her forward. Month 5 closed not with drama or fanfare, but with quiet reflection, a recognition that growth is rarely flashy. It is measured in the ability to face life as it comes, to take responsibility for choices, and to act even when fear and uncertainty loom large. She was becoming more than independent. She was becoming competent, thoughtful, and above all, prepared for whatever life would inevitably throw her way. By the time she returned home, the weight of her choices had finally settled. She was exhausted, humbled, and yet quietly proud of herself. Every setback she had faced, the bills she couldn't pay, the doors that closed, the nights spent worrying, had taught her something she could never have learned through warnings alone. We sat together in the living room, silence stretching between us, not awkward, but full of understanding. I watched her take a deep breath, finally allowing herself to feel relief, as if she had carried the world on her shoulders and was just setting it down. This is harder than I ever imagined," she whispered. "I didn't know independence meant this much responsibility." "I know," I replied softly, "but now you do. And the strength you've built isn't about avoiding mistakes. It's about surviving them and learning to rise after each fall." Her eyes glistened with gratitude, and for the first time in months, I felt a deep sense of connection. The daughter who once shrugged off my warnings had grown into a young woman who understood the value of guidance, discipline, and self-reliance. We reflected on the journey, the small victories, and the major hurdles. She realized the truth I had been trying to teach all along. Independence isn't freedom from responsibility. It's the courage to face consequences and learn from them. Every choice she made, every challenge she confronted, shaped her into someone resilient, capable, and ready for life's unpredictability. More than money, more than possessions, this experience had given her and us a bond rooted in respect, trust, and lessons learned the hard way. And I knew that what she had gained would stay with her for the rest of her life. Through it all, I realized something vital. As much as we try to shield the people we love, real growth comes when they stumble, fall, and pick themselves up again. Love sometimes means standing back, letting go, and allowing them to experience life unfiltered, even when it's painful to watch. And as she prepared to leave for her next chapter, stronger, wiser, and more grounded, I felt a quiet pride that transcended words. She hadn't just survived independence, she had learned to master it, and that mastery would guide her long after she left my side. Life tests us in ways we never anticipate, but those tests are where growth lives. Have you ever faced a moment where lessons came the hard way? How did you overcome it? Share your story in the comments. I would love to hear where you're watching from. Your experiences, your struggles, your triumphs, they deserve to be heard. Don't forget to subscribe to hear more stories like this. This is She Echoed, where every story finds its voice.